Chris Ventura, the CEO of Harness Projects. Now, for those of us joining for the first time to one of our webinars, Harness Projects is an education provider. We teach UX design skills, and our programs follow a very unique real project learning model, where effectively our students work on live company challenges while we train them. We pride ourselves on being the only provider that helps students gain skills and experience all in the one course. So in tonight's webinar, we will be diving into the topic of how to pivot into a UX design career. We are joined by three incredible panelists and Harness Projects mentors who are going to be speaking and fielding your questions tonight. So firstly, I'd just like to welcome Hieu Quach, Senior UX Designer at Atlassian. Welcome, Hieu.
Thank you, Chris. Hi, everyone.
Thanks, Hieu. And also we have Nuck Busman, Senior UX Designer at the Home Depot. Welcome, Nick.
Hey, glad to be here.
Shortly, we will have Yuxi Liu, who will be joining us, and I'll do an introduction when she's here. She is the Senior UX Researcher at Coursera. So we'll get to meet her in a little while. Now, just to set the scene for tonight, for the first part of this webinar, we're going to be hearing presentations from each of our panelists. We will then have a Q&A session at the end of the presentation, so please stick around if you want to get your questions answered. And each of the panel will go through it and do their best to field those questions. At the bottom of your screen, you will see a Q&A button. This is an area that you can use to submit your questions to the panel, and we'll try and get through as many as possible throughout the evening. Okay, so just to start things off, I'm going to hand over to Hieu, who's going to be speaking about what UX design looks like in startups, agencies, and high-growth companies. Thanks, Hieu. Do you want to take it away?
Sure, thank you. So I'll share my screen. Let me know if you see my screen okay. Okay, great. So I'm very excited to be here. Today, in this first presentation, one of the three panelists, my topic, like Chris mentioned, I will talk about my own experience at three different types of organizations that, I've seen a lot of UX and product designers work in. Before we get into the topic, a little bit about myself. So currently, I'm a senior UX designer at Atlassian, and I'll talk a little bit more about the company in the later slides. I'm very new to the Harness Project, so I'm excited to be here and and sharing this topic with you all. I'm originally from Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam, and currently I'm based in Austin, Texas. One fun fact: so outside of doing UX design, I read and research a lot about airplanes in general. So you can see, I have an illustration here of paper planes. And so let's dive in. So throughout my design journey so far, around nine years, I had the opportunity to work at three different environments, from agency, a very small agency, to a startup, and currently at a high growth and mature organizations. So that gave me the opportunity to grow as a designer, and I see opportunities and challenges in all of these three environments. So I want to go through each one of them and share with you my learnings. Hopefully, if you are considering, transitioning to UX design, and as you're applying for, CEO application, you know what to expect, right? For each one of these categories of environment. So let's start out with design agency. The order that I'm going through, it's just my chronological order as I grew in my career. There's no preference one over the others. So just a note. So I went to school undergraduate for graphic design. So I wasn't trained in UX at all. Mostly I was working on visual like design mostly print. So very new to UX. So when I started out as an intern at this small agency called The Lift, and I want to give you like a quick snapshot of the agency so that you kind of get a flavor of what a design agency means. So this is a smaller design agency. This is like a local agency. There could be big agency like national agencies or even global agency. I'm not familiar with that, but but that's a different experience for this. This is a smaller one, less than 15 people, and usually there's like business partners, design engineers, project managers, to work with different clients and admins. So the first 3 months I was an intern, and then I transitioned to a full-time UX UI designers. So the type of clients, we try at all times, we try to balance between having a large client. So I was in San Diego, and so, we work a lot with Sony and Qualcomm. And then we also try to work on innovative concept with, startups across the US. So on the right-hand side, you can see, there's like a variety of companies we worked with. The most interesting thing for me about this journey is the different type of medium that I got exposed to. So I worked, on web design, mobile design, and then also some interactive design like kiosks or audio or demo, in electronic store like Best Buy. And then also try to touch on some smart devices concept. So just variety of interaction design there. So that's like a snapshot. What are some of the key learnings that I had there? So the first one for me is really important, and especially for me who just came out fresh out of school, I got the opportunity to expose to a wide variety of design medium, right? So like you saw on the last slide, coming from print design, now I got to touch on like, what does it mean to design a website or a mobile, versus something more interactive like a shopping kiosk. So when you work with an agency, I'd say every 3 to 6 months, you work with one client on one project and then you move on. So that gives you over the years, you got exposed to a lot of interesting problem spaces. So besides the medium, you also learn about different industries. So among the clients that we worked with, I got to know a little bit more about financial industry, and then also healthcare and then entertainment. So every time that you work on a project, like you gain information in that space. So that to me, early in my career, that was very helpful to gauge what I like to do later on in my career. This one is not really particular to agency, but as a recent graduate, working at agency, I started doing very small tasks. And I'm sharing this because if you happen to find yourself in this type of scenario, it's not because you're not trusted enough to do the whole full end-to-end process design at the beginning. So for me, I started out doing a lot of like documentations of design, design spec asset creation, handing up to developers and then do some QA on the side. But doing those things for the first 6 months or so really helped prepare me for, for a more kind of end-to-end design process later on. And I learned a lot, mostly through mentorship and doing. So I was lucky enough that the senior designer there, even though he was very small, they're willing to teach me, and I'm willing to take on information and knowledge. So I asked a lot of questions, and I try to seek feedback as much as I could. When I work on design thinking, even research, so that I can apply it to my projects. So definitely, if you're working for if you're joining a small company, don't think of it as a disadvantage, because sometimes smaller company, you do have the opportunity to establish relationships, right? That can help with your career growth later on. 2 challenges. So for every environment, I'll talk about opportunities and challenges. So the first one for me is it's hard to measure design impact and iterate. So I can talk. So once you finish your design project, and let's say even the developers built it out, you hand it off to the client, and oftentimes you don't know what happens to it next, right? The client might decide to launch it, or they just put it in a cabinet somewhere, or like they don't have to tell you what happens to it. So for you as a designer, when you put together a portfolio, it could be challenging. So it happened to me when I interviewed for Atlassian. I remember like I don't have numbers. So, but I think that's a challenge. But there's a few ways you can go around it. Maybe you can find an online article that maybe talked about it. Sometimes clients can share with you, but it's really rare. So not to say that there's no way around sharing impact, but this is a challenge, right? Like when you hand it off, you don't know. So just something to keep in mind. Lack of learning resources. So I think this is not as surprising. More mature company will have more learning resources. But again, for this small agency, I learned mostly from doing and also from the people, right? From the more senior designers. So with all of the, I guess pros and cons, opportunities and challenges, ask yourself this question: at this point in your career, right? Are you highly interested in going broad to explore different design medium and learn about different industries, products, and services? If this is what you want to focus on this point in your career, then agency might be the right choice. And I emphasize at this point in your career because not one of these options are better than the other. It's just really like in this point in your career growth, which one makes most sense to you? Because I see designer going back and forth among these three. Even a very senior person might jump to an agency or startup, right? So ask yourself a question. It's have to be relative to your journey. Okay, so let's move on to the startup. I think at the end of the presentation, I can take some questions. So I'll keep going. So the agency I work, one of our startup clients for the Lyft, which is the last agency I talked about, actually decided to acquire us. They want to grow the design, so they brought the whole team in house. So that was my beginning journey with working with a startup. So with me was the startup name. It grew to Series A. It grew really fast from 20 to 50 people across software and hardware. So my role was a mid-level UX UI designers. Later on in my time there, I led some projects. This is where I started working more closely with the PM, product managers and engineers, because we started working on agile developments. And so it's very important to work closely. The type of products we built was mostly e-commerce websites. And then later on, we also explore kiosk, self-checkout, like shopping kiosks, like you see on the right-hand side, some mobile apps, and also some concepts around like automated vending machines. So on the right side here, it's just a shopping kiosk that I helped design. And in the background photo, that was me sort of like coming out on the launch event in Chicago a few years ago. And when it's launched, everyone just came out and helped out. So I'll talk a little bit about that in a bit. So just kind of give you like a quick snapshot of a small kind of startup setup. So key learnings. The first one, I think you might have seen this in, media, and you read online from others people. But for me, yeah, I think it's all about like speed and chaos. So you just have to accept it, right? Like you don't know what's gonna happen next, and there's a lot of like changes happening, and things are moving fast. But that's the nature of a startup. It could be exciting too if you find the right one. So I think in a way, embrace it. Of course, to a level of your comfort. If it's like stressing you out and you losing work-life balance, and then at that point it's not a good fit anymore. For designers, what this means is that because startup run really fast and oftentimes there's not enough resources, you don't get to follow the design process 100% all the time. Right. So in school, hopefully in this program, you learn about all of the steps of design. But in a startup environment, oftentimes you don't get the time and the support to do all of that. So you need to find creative ways to go about that. For instance, research. In my time there, we didn't have researcher, we didn't have a lot of support for research. So, I got creative by talking to the customer support team to understand how our customers are doing certain tasks, what problems they were having, and they were able to share with me, right? So that's like zero cost. And I was able to find what I need. Not perfect, but there are some ways that you can go around it. Which led me to the next one is all like championing for design, anywhere, anytime. It's one of my favorite things, but in reflection, it was a painful experience at first. So at the startup, right? Not everyone understands the role of design, the role of UX design. People think they know design in general, but oftentimes they're not correct about it. So it was my job to be patient and really help educate my stakeholders and partners around why we need to do certain things in the design process. Why need we do research? Why need we make sure that whatever visual design that we were planning, we need to ship exactly like that. Like not slightly different, right? It took a lot of time to do that, but once you can help educate your partners, then you start seeing improvement in the product quality. And at the end, right, customer happier and business get more revenue. So it's a constant thing. At the more mature company, more people understand the role of design, so you do less. You still championing, but I think the level of championing is a bit less compared to a more like smaller startups. Wearing multiple hats. So at least in my experience, normal time, not so much, but during crunch time, launch time, it's expected that, besides doing design, we can help out with other tasks. So in the photo I showed earlier, like during the 2 weeks leading to the launch, I helped out QA the software and hardware. I even stay in the inventory and count certain items. So because resources always not a luxury at a startup. So if it's needed, then all hands on deck, and you help out as much as you can. But make sure though, it's not the norm, right? If you do that often, then that's a raw expectation. And on the positive side, like by putting on different hats, it kind of helped me gain the empathy for the internal users. So if you designing internal apps for other employees, then you feel their pain, or you feel, you basically walk their shoes, and that helps with the design process. 2 challenges. So again, lack of learning resources. If the startup gets to a very like a more mature level, then there will be more documented resources for you to learn from. But oftentimes, a startup similar to agency, you learn by doing. Like you just take on a new projects, your boss hand you new projects, and you just learn your way around it and try it, and then maybe fail and learn again. But as you grow more seniors, then try to document the knowledge yourself, and hopefully share that with others. And that's how bigger companies start building their libraries of resources. I spoke a little bit about this earlier, all right, but the uncertainty natures is always there for startups. The business as a whole might stop tomorrow, or it might take up and become the next unicorn. The spectrum is really broad. When it comes to design, what it means is that every time you design something, you don't know what to expect for the outcome. So it could ship as an MVP and then make it out there and become, the next Uber, Airbnb. Or you might design something and it makes to MVP, and then that's it. That's the end of it. Or sometimes you design something and it always make it to the presentation, the investor presentation, and that's it, right? So don't expect like a normal outcomes every single time for when you work on a problem. So with all of that, it's one career. Are you highly interested in a fast-paced environment, learning by doing? Okay, putting on different hats. And I threw in a bonus here. Do you care deeply enough about a startup vision? If the answer is yes, then maybe startup is a right place for you to start. I threw in the care deeply because even if the first few don't check your boxes, but you're really passionate about problem space, and then there's a startup out there that's solving it, and you want to be a part of it, I would say go for it. You might not grow so much as a designer, but you're doing what you really care about. And if that's not for you after a few years, you can always switch to the other environment. So just something to think about there. Okay, so we got to the last environment, which is the more high growth, mature organizations. So I joined Atlassian 5 years ago. So a little bit about the company. So Atlassian, we build collaboration products and teamwork best practices. So the products that most commonly known for is Jira, Confluence, Trello, along with about 10 other products. The company actually started in Australia, Sydney, Australia, and we just celebrated our 20th anniversary this year. So it's been growing really fast in the past few years, from like 2,000 to 8,000 people. So it's really like every week I see new joiners. And that means more teams are forming over the last few years that I'm here. We are global, and since after COVID, the company made it permanent that we want to adopt a hybrid remote environment. So by default, you are remote, and then if you happen to be in one of the main cities, like San Francisco, Sydney, or Austin, or New York, then you can come into the office if you want. So I joined as a mid-level, and I grew to senior designers. My team look after the whole end-to-end buying journey. So, from the moment when a company needs to look for a better software for collaboration, research about it, try it, buys it, and then later on adds on more, plugins and it adopts other tools. And then here are some of the key projects that I worked on, like envisioning the web experience, building experience, etc. So key learnings, one should track of time. So there are 4 key learnings I want to share. It is sort of a more mature org. The first one is communication. So this could be a very broad topic, but I want to be I want to give more clear examples. So at the bigger company, there's a lot of opportunity for you to communicate your design. So whether you presenting to your stakeholders, you presenting to your fellow designers, right, in the critique, whether you trying to influence the decisions as you get more senior, or writing, just documenting your design. There's so much communication that goes on. I remember when I joined, I was like, wow, I spent a lot of time just like working on communication skill, and so I did get the support to get better at it, but it's a constant learning thing for me. So that's number one. And then research. So compared to agency and startup, there's way more resources for research in a more mature company. You have there's a team, there's a dedicated team, so you can get help if you need, but also there's a lot of resources. So if I need to run on a study on my own, and I do have the tools and the documentation to follow, it makes it easier every single project to include research. Also data, like at the more mature company, there's more data for you to access, which helps with the design decision making process. Versus at a startup, there's not a lot of data because we're still trying to get more customers. So you have to kind of go around and find, the best piece of data. But at the more mature company, but probably sometimes opposite, like there's so much data that you need to know where to go to find the right piece of insight. Focus. So at the more in a bigger company, each team and each individual will focus on a particular set of features or customer journeys. So because of that, you do have more time to dig into a problem and come up and have the time to come up with ideas and then design something and then iterate multiple versions. So you spend a little bit more time on on a particular problem space. Not always, but generally speaking, compared to startup or agency, like where you move really fast and you're trying to do all the things, you do have to focus when you join a larger company. And then career growth. So similar to all of the resources that I talked about earlier, usually at this company, there's a lot of opportunities for you to grow your career with working with your managers, right? Like there's documentations and there's different roles within a team or different within a company that you can move around to make sure that you can grow the way that you would like it to be. So definitely a big opportunity there as well. It doesn't, of course, it comes with its own challenges. Bigger companies, I would say my experience, shipping project is way slower. And I think the fundamental reason is because the design have to go through several layers of review and approvals, just to make sure that the final products, right, it meets all the requirements. Because bigger companies produce products that are used by million or like thousands and million of users. So we want to make sure that every changes, every design that we put out there have to meet the bar, and therefore explain the longer duration project. So if you come on a startup, it could feel slow to you. Another thing that I've seen, especially in a fast-growing company, is that when so many teams start emerging, then you have communication problems. And so when teams don't talk to each other, the customer are the one who get hurt the most, because now you have all of these disconnected journeys. So if I'm trying to go through the whole experience, and then I see some gaps in experience, like there's like a glitch or like there's like a inconsistency. Usually the problem is like teams within a company don't talk to each other. So just be aware of this and constantly, making sure that you understand what is the end-to-end journey, how is the user feeling when they go through the whole thing, and making sure that you talk to other teams. So that's another challenge I see with more larger companies. So with large company, are you highly interested in learning from community designers and other professionals? also having access to abundant knowledge resources, and then making an impact on a much larger scale. So that's a question I would pose for this. So yeah, so with all of the things I just share, I just want to say that each environment has its own opportunities and challenges. So it's really up to you to decide, like, in right now in any point of your career, which one makes the most sense, and what makes you excited the most, and you go for it, and you can always experiment and try different things. Thank you very much, and I think I'll pause there for, I guess, questions.
Great, thank you, Hieu. That was excellent. Such a good such a good insight. Especially for those of you thinking about what types of roles to apply for, to give some thought to the types of environment that you want to be working in. Are you interested in that fast-paced startup environment? If you can get access to a high-growth, mature organizations, can be incredible mentorship, support from a very large professional network of designers. So there's different qualities from all of these types of organizations. So this presentation was included to give you some insight into what to think about. We're going to jump to questions in a moment before we jump to the next panelist, but I just want to add Yuxi to the panel, who's arrived earlier in the webinar. So just going to welcome you, Yuxi, to the panel. Hello, Yuxi. Nice to see you. There you are. You're muted. Yeah.
Hi, everyone.
Welcome. So I'm just going to field a few questions and then we'll move on to the next. We'll have a lot more time at the end of the presentations to go through all of your questions. So hang tight until then. But I have just one question here from Natasha. This is directed to Hieu. Just wanted to ask, did you come from a creative background, and how did you become interested in UX UI design?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yeah, so I did come from a creative background, studying graphic design. I would say when I joined this agency, right, I mentioned earlier, at the time, I would just want to get a job in design, to be fair. And so when I saw the website, I saw some really interesting, projects, and I got accepted. So I think in the first few months, observing, how other designers operate, and actually getting my feet wet with some of the thinking process behind my design decisions. I started getting more interested in UX, right? Like, I think I started asking myself, like, why do I make this design decisions? Like, is it serving, like, how is it serving the users? So it's partly me being curious, but also like the more senior designer start to help me with like the thinking, like, have you thought about this, right? Like, do you want to do some research? So I think at that point, it sparked an early interest of like, oh, okay, wow, there's a whole profession in this. And by doing that, I'm still keeping my creative skills, but also I can build on top of it. And so from there on, I got really into it, and think project after project, I tried to become, a proper UX designer.
Thanks, Hieu. Next question is from Neil, who asks, while working at Atlassian, Hieu, you mentioned that you worked on future web experiences. What did that feel like, and how did you approach working on novel products?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, because I'm still working on that project. It's been a year-long project. So for me, working on so before I started project, most of the project I worked with was more like it's going to ship, like it's going to be near term, right? We're going to work on a very specific problem space, and then we're going to ship, and then iterate. So this project was the first time that I got to work on like an envisioning project. So I think the key, to keep my answer short, I think the greatest opportunity for me in working on that space, in that type of project, is that you had a higher visibility into a lot of like the moving parts of, I guess, the business, right? Because in order to envision, you need to know like what are some of the fundamental pain points that we're experiencing. And then I think another exciting part is you have the opportunity and support from everyone to think bold, right? I can envision like even like a crazy version go as far as I can, and then we will bring it back. And from doing all that, then we can find real opportunities that we can experiment with, and then hopefully design and ship. So yeah, and one challenge I would say is that sometimes it could feel like very abstract at times because you work on some futuristic. So sometimes whenever I feel that sense of challenge, I'll seek advice from my managers and other folks in the team to kind of bring myself back to the reality.
Great, thank you, Hieu. Next question is from Thena, who asks, would you work for another startup again after working for a large company?
Yeah, I would. And I love that question because throughout my time, it depends on where I was in, again, back to like where it depends on where you are in the journey. If you ask me the first 2 or 3 years I joined Atlassian, probably I would say no, because at that time I was still, embracing, because I just came from a startup. So I was embracing this new mature organization with all of the things I could learn. But I think in the next few years, maybe when I learn enough, I guess, that there will be never enough learning. But let's just say when I meet a certain person and there's a startup out there that's starting something that I'm really interested in, whether it's the space or maybe it's just the role, I think I'll say yes to it. So yeah, good question.
Thanks, Hieu. Faye asks, what type of education resources did you utilize when you moved from print design to UX UI?
Try to remember. It's been a while. So luckily, a lot of the things. Well, that was a while ago, but even back then, there was a lot of online resources. Nowadays, absolutely, like there's a lot of designers, sharing their experience on YouTube. But you can find Coursera and other online educations. For me, at the time, one of the early learning materials for me was from the more senior folks. So they would share with me like books to read, and I'm happy to share some links on books later. But constant feedback, I think that's the key. So I let's just say I work on a flow, and then in the weekly critique, I'll get all of the feedback, and then in the feedback they will provide some sort of like knowledge in there, and then I go look them up, and then I sort of connect the dots. So just a lot of learning through that way, and not until later on at Atlassian that I actually got proper learning materials.
Awesome, thank you, Hieu. We'll just take one more question before we move to the next presentation, and then for the rest, we'll get to you at the end. So next question is, since you came from a design background, did you learn about any coding to build websites, to improve your UX UI, or were you just comfortable liaising with web developers and IT who knew coding?
Yeah, I hear this question a lot too. So in school, I remember when I was studying print, I did take 2 web design basic classes like HTML, CSS. So it definitely useful knowledge. Later in my career, I did not code a lot. But what that knowledge helped me was that when I work with developers, when handing out design or when I do QA, I can speak the language a little bit, right? So the more overlapped, the more common in your language with your partners, whether it's business or developers, the better the outcome will be. So if they can speak the language, they can understand, then it's more likely that they will help fix the things. So definitely, I think modern designers, some companies might be different from others, but you don't have to code, but knowing the basics, the fundamentals, and keeping up with the latest, language, I think is very, very, very useful.
Awesome. Thank you, Hieu. Okay. Thanks everyone for your questions. We will come back to those shortly. Next, I want to move on to our second presentation for the evening. This will be presented by Yuxi Liu, who's Senior UX Researcher at Coursera. Yuxi has an interesting topic. She's going to be sharing some of her own experiences in pivoting into a UX research career. So really interested to hear about that. So Yuxi, over to you.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Hieu, for the incredibly insightful presentation. I feel like a lot of what you talked about it just resonates so deeply with me because I've had experiences also at agency, startup, and now at a more mature company. Everything you said, it was a great reflection exercise. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. But let me just make sure that I do this correctly. I'm going to share my desktop and then go ahead and do slideshow. All right, is everyone seeing the presentation? Awesome. So as actually, Hugh kind of cued me a little bit when he said that if you're looking for resources how to pivot into UX, you can look at courses on Coursera. That is the place where I currently work. It is an online platform for education. Today, the topic that I want to really share with all of you is I didn't start out my career in UX, and I really wanted to, in my own career path, I didn't want to, when I wanted to pivot into UX, I didn't want to start from square one. I really wanted to build on my existing experiences. So this is kind of my journey of how I found ways to build my portfolio and start and get into UX not as an entry-level role. So without further ado, I'll just share my nonlinear career path. I studied business in undergrad, and my first two jobs were more on the business side. First as a management consultant working with different industries, but I always had a passion for education. That's something that I've always wanted to work in. So when the opportunity came up to join a education company, I jumped on that boat and I did product strategy there, which actually mostly meant the same thing as consulting. Is a lot of interviews and surveys to really understand the market. But while I was there, I really felt a disconnect between what I was doing and what I want to do. I realized that even though I was informing quote unquote high impact work, the strategy, but I realized I never talked to any of our users, any of our customers. I just felt the sense that maybe I don't know what's best, just based on these numbers. And just right around that time, I think when I was feeling this need to really get deeper into my interest in education, I also wanted a role change, but I didn't know what role I wanted to change into. At this moment, I had no idea UX existed. Cengage is a publisher, so it's a little bit more on the slower side of digital transformation, but today they have more of a digital product portfolio. When I was in graduate school, so I went to Graduate School of Education at Stanford, where I focused on learning science and also design. It was really awesome opportunity because I got a lot of chances to learn about design research through need finding courses, where my first assignment, I still remember, the professor Michael Berry from the D School told all of us to go sit in a cafe for 3 hours. Just go sit there and observe. At first, I was so confused. Like, what are we observing? 3 hours is a lot of time. Like, why are we going to the cafe? And so I literally remember sitting in there with a very skeptical mindset in the beginning. But then as the time passed on, as I started picking up on these like interesting behaviors and cues, I started forming my own like part of me is like, I also remember is like, don't tell too much stories in your own head. Just look at what are things that is observable. And I remember at the end of the 3 hours, I wanted to sit there longer. I just felt like I had so many questions about these people, what they were doing and why they were showing up the way they did, and what conversations they were having. And so that kind of is like an initial spark for me that this work is so deeply interesting to really understand human psychology, human behavior. I think that kind of really guided me a little bit in navigating my path through course selection in graduate school. And then afterwards, I still wasn't sure what I wanted to do, but I had this inkling that I want to continue doing this type of design research type of work. So then I continued on for 8 months and picked up on different gigs. And eventually, 3 years ago, I landed my first full-time UX research role at Coursera. And today, the focus of the talk is really about this stage 4, the gigs, because I think like in retrospect, things are connecting better than when it did when I was in the middle of it. But now I can see some of the threads, and I really want to share my experience to hopefully maybe inspire others who are starting out in your career in UX, perhaps you have an interest in research, which is this which I see as this specialization in UX field where your job focuses a lot on deeply understanding user needs using research, qualitative interviewing, and survey methodologies. So as I mentioned at the very beginning, by this point, as you can see, I have about 3 years of professional experience. When I was thinking about doing more UX research work, I found opportunity to join big tech companies as a research assistant as the first stepping stone into the UX field. But I very seriously considered that path, but it just, to me personally, it felt like too much of a step backwards in my career. So I wanted to find an alternative way to break into UX. So I looked at how do people interview candidates. One of the first thing people always ask for is share projects with us. Where's your portfolio? As a researcher, actually, you don't necessarily have a portfolio website, but you do need to have projects under your belt to showcase. So that's where I decided I'm going to go out and find my own gigs to build my own portfolio. So at a high level, I did 4 gigs over the course of about 8 months. They're all in the roughly around education industry or semi-adjacent, because that, for me, I had already picked my industry of choice, and that's education. So my first gig, I worked at an elementary school. It's called a primary school in East Palo Alto, and it was about piloting a new edtech product at the school with 5-year-olds. It was really fun. It was a part-time gig, and then that actually led to an opportunity to join a really early stage edtech nonprofit called Talking Points. It was 5 people in total. I was actually brought on as the first product manager, but during my course of doing my 2 months of working there, I didn't have any mentorship. And so actually a lot of what Hieu mentioned about both the benefits of working at a startup where I got to wear many hats and had a lot of freedom in how I approach problems. At the same time, I wanted to learn how to do product management, for example. In this case, I didn't have the mentorship, the resources to really build that muscle. But so what naturally I ended up doing is I leveraged the research toolkit and skill sets I had gained from graduate school and did a lot of foundational research and user testing for this company. So actually, it was very telling for myself, a signal that I'm maybe going down the right path when the founder of the company told me at the end of my two-month gig that, hey, you see, you actually didn't do anything you're supposed to do as a product manager. I was like, oh, this is going to be an interesting performance review. So what do you mean? And she said, well, you didn't build the product roadmap, but what you did is incredible research findings to actually help us understand better who we're serving, for the parents that we're serving. Would you like to continue doing research for us? I thought that was like just incredible market signal back to me. It's like, oh, the skill set I have and what I found naturally interesting for myself to do, and I'm naturally kind of more skilled at doing, is this thing called UX research. It was at this moment that when I realized, oh, I think I want to become a UX researcher. But at this moment, again, I don't have enough of a portfolio to go for a full-time UX researcher role yet. So I continued working at another gig with a philanthropic foundation. It was also just so fun, working with these different types of environments and getting to know how to manage the different stakeholders from depending on the cadence of how they work. With the foundation, it was very different. It was more focus group based kind of research because we don't have the resources to conduct one-on-one interviews. Then from there, it led to I would say probably the first real UX research project was at the design agency PunchCut. I would say it's like similar size or slightly bigger than the design agency that you worked at, Hieu. It was a wonderful environment where I got to first time collaborate with a product manager and a UX designer very closely through the client that I worked with. So all of these gigs didn't happen at the same time. It was like one built on top of the other. Perhaps like the next section I want to talk about is like the 4 steps of actually landing gigs, like the ones that I found for myself. For me, the first one, the first step really is actually a mindset shift. Because prior to doing this 8-month exploration, I didn't know that it would be this long, to be honest. And it was really putting myself out there and being open to part-time job. Sometimes some of the gigs, they were like 5 to 10 hours per week. Some of them were full-time, 40 hours per week, but it's variable. So just having an open and flexible mindset with what kind of gigs, what kind of structure a gig might be. It may not always be full-time. And the second one is actually around a lot of people, from my experience, not all organizations recognize the value of UX or UX research. So sometimes it's actually, it takes some selling, really pitching first, like our skill sets as UX professionals, and also helping to educate them a little bit on what kind of problems UX can really help solve. So, so the step 2, from my experience, is actually identifying those people at the organization who are interested in innovation and change, and they're willing to hear about different approaches and actually are experiencing perhaps some bottlenecks because they currently don't have resources to solve the problems they're interested in solving. Step 3 is once you have identified these people and you actually get them on a call in some way or email, get a chance to really listen and to their answers to this question. What challenges are you facing? Sometimes like the challenges they describe are things that's outside of UX domain, but oftentimes a lot of the challenges they describe from from my experience are actually, you can turn them into research questions, because a lot of times it's about ambiguity, it's about uncertainty. Is the company, is our strategy, is the next product launch like going to be successful? Well, dig in a little bit, like what are some concerns you might have? Well, maybe we don't know enough about this particular market, or we don't know enough about how our parents, for example, are using a particular app. Just listen for those research needs. And then the last step here is then like formulating those challenges that you hear and turn them into research questions and pitch them back to the client, the organization, as something that you can help solve with research skill sets. I'm going to walk through these 4 steps with an example. The example I want to walk through is the primary school gig that I did, because I think this is a good example to share because this was my first gig. I always think like the first stepping stone is sometimes the hardest. Once you take that first step, I built a lot of confidence from having done this process and then iterating on that and continue. So identify people. So at this point, I already did step 1, right? I already opened up my mindset. It's like, okay, I'm gonna do some gigs. I'm gonna do some part-time work. That's okay. Step 2 is identifying people who are interested in innovation. So I identified there's this incredible woman named Yuxi Liu, who was the co-founder and chief design officer at this innovative elementary school. I was like, wow, a chief design officer, that title sounds very aligned. And I went to one of her talks, and through that I was connected with her. And when I found out that she was looking for some help, I reached out and had a conversation with her. And I did ask her, so what challenges are you facing? And one of the things that she shared with me is that a lot of the children in the pre-K class at the school in East Palo Alto struggle with self-regulation. The school primarily serves underprivileged populations, and the school just doesn't have enough resources to evaluate new edtech products that perhaps could help children learn a little bit more about self-regulation skills. So at this point, it's like, well, this is super aligned with my own interest. Hugh talked about when you're joining a startup, you want to really believe in their mission. I was 100% bought into the primary school's mission. And so when this kind of challenge was brought up, to me, what I heard is that, well, there's a particular tech product that's already been identified, then what's needed is we need to run a pilot with some target students in that age group. So I'm offered up my time and also my skill set of being able to run the pilot with students, and during that pilot, being able to observe what are the pains and the gains from the program. So that was the beginning. I would say this is the first stepping stone for the rest of the gigs. One thing that I, in reflecting on my journey, that I'm hugely grateful for is that every single gig that I did mattered, because your experiences are stackable. Like I felt with every gig, I got closer and closer to doing more complex and full-fledged UX research projects, starting with running a small pilot at a school to actually working with a product manager and a designer at an agency. Everything in between helped me build up the skill sets. And also why these gigs are important. Now that I'm sitting on the other end of the table, I encourage a lot of people who come to me for advice is that from an interviewer point of view, like from my point of view as an interviewer today, you just need one really solid story to answer questions about how to collaborate with a product manager and designer. Maybe at different companies different, but when I was interviewing after my gig at the agency for full-time jobs, I interviewed at 2 companies, and at that time I only had one experience working with a product manager and designer, and I used that story and landed both jobs. So for me, I think it's important to, when you're thinking about gigs, that interviewers will ask you about these questions about how to collaborate with these important cross-functional stakeholders. Find ways to get at least one good experience, solid experience where you can share stories from. So I think that kind of wraps up my presentation, and I just want to leave everyone with 4 takeaways. The first takeaway is just, no matter where you're coming from, either from undergrad, from grad school, from like other careers, just know that you have valuable knowledge and skill sets from past experiences. And it's really, it might be a creative exercise to think about how you might leverage them to break into the next career, if that's UX. There's a lot of transferable skills. The second one is, if you're thinking about gigs, start with organizations you care about. From my experience, I found that passion really sells. Like one of the reasons why I think a lot of my initial gigs are in education is because that was the field that I'm most passionate about. And even if I never had a certain kind of specific experience, for example, I never worked in a school before, the passion really makes up for some of that lack of direct experience. There are also a few like pro bono opportunities that I've come across over the last couple of years where I felt like it really helped people build portfolio. One is United States Digital Services. I think I got that wrong. USDS. Okay, I'm gonna have to get back. If other people know, please jump in. And then the second one is Tech Fleet. It also helps match people up with projects. The third one is just know, even though you are doing gigs, know that your skill set is worth actual money and compensation. I would encourage you to either negotiate by the project or by the hour. One of the common, I think, pitfalls that I fell into in the very beginning, and also I've seen other people fall into, is thinking that, oh, I'm gonna get a great project out of this, so I don't need to be paid. But actually, your experience with a client would be much harder when it's free, because they don't have any skin in the game. Especially if you're thinking about UX research, you need their help in recruiting participants for your research. If they don't have any incentive to help you, it could drag on for a long time. So if the organization you want to help has a very limited budget, just at a minimum ask for a nominal fee of like maybe a few $100s so that they have some skin in the game. And lastly, just remember that every single project you work on with a client, external client, just makes awesome material for your portfolio. And in the end help you answer lots of interview questions that might come up about your stakeholder management skills. Yeah, and that wraps up my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Yuxi. That was incredible. Awesome to hear your journey and how you've landed in the role that you're in today. We have a lot of questions for you as well. One of the things that I took away from that, your process for finding gigs actually mirrors very closely our process at Harness for finding projects with clients for our students. We spend a lot of time trying to think about what are the challenges that they're solving, who are the passionate people in these organizations, so that we can curate projects that give students these really in-depth, healthy experiences of learning and obviously getting a portfolio piece. So just an interesting mirroring as I was listening to your presentation. So let's jump to some questions. We'll do a few and then we'll go to Nick and then we'll come back to the remaining questions. So let me just scroll through. We've got quite a few, so bear with me. One of the ones for Yuxi here are, do you believe UX, so this is from Natasha, is learning UX design necessary in order to be a UX researcher? Did applying your soft skills from previous experiences help you in your UX research career? And if so, how? So we may have covered a part of that second part of that question, but interesting to know about the UX design component and how did that help?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that UX design education would help you be a much stronger collaborator with design team. So Hieu and Nick would appreciate you as a UX researcher if you have an eye for design, and especially at a company that's Coursera, 300 people, it's kind of a little bit more startup. We didn't have a very strong, big research.
Oops, looks like we've lost.
Cognitive walk. Oh, you lost me?
We just had a bit of a buffering, but I think you're back.
Oh, okay, I'm back. Okay, so yeah, so I was just saying that when the research team was smaller, and currently we still have this capacity struggle as well, is there's always needs to do cognitive walkthroughs or do some kind of user testing on designs at different stages. If you have great sense of understanding of the different design principles, you can really help the team speed up that evaluation process. Like, so for example, my mentor, when I was choosing what's my first, where would I go for my first full-time research position, I really looked for a mentor in a manager, and that's how I chose Coursera. And my current manager is a really well-trained designer as well as researcher with 3 decades of experience in UX. So I learned a lot actually from him. I basically learned a lot from watching him critique designs and the kind of ways that he looks at design through the lens of different heuristics. That's very valuable. But you don't have to learn all the ins and outs of Figma, for example. I don't have that skill, but I can comment on Figma with my design collaborators. And so I think also on the soft skill side, it's an absolute plus if you have previous professional experience where you can showcase that you are very collaborative and you know how to prioritize different requests and how to say no diplomatically to people.
Great, thanks, Yuxi. The next question is just about the gigs again, perhaps going a little bit deeper in how you landed those gigs without an established portfolio. So for example, this person asks, were they already looking for a UX researcher, product manager they've written here, or did you just pitch yourself and convince them?
Yeah, that's a great question. For my first gig at the school, I would say they were not looking for a UX researcher. They didn't know, they were looking for somebody to help. It was a kind of an undefined job or slash it was a gig. So it was very much a gig, like 5 hours per week. I would say that what helped me land that initial gig, I think it's mostly my interest in education. The fact that I actually was studying education or just finished studying, getting a degree in education and worked with kids through through my program. So it wasn't professional experience, it's more my graduate study projects. And then for the second gig, that was a little bit more, definitely a lot more formal, is a full-time contract job with a startup. I pitched them based on my master's project. So it's also not a professional quote unquote experience, but it was a project where I showed that I could take something from beginning to end. And then they asked me, they gave me a take home assignment to do a competitor analysis. So I think in that one, I felt like it went back to my old wheelhouse of looking at products and companies and evaluating them, comparing them. It was less of a UX task, I would say. But during that, when I was doing that first startup gig, I actually started interacting a lot more, seeking mentorship from the very vibrant UX community here in the Bay Area. I was very grateful to have met people who were willing to talk to me about methodology. I actually got a senior UX researcher to do a couple mentorship sessions with me, and the startup reimbursed me for those coaching sessions because they knew I needed to learn, I needed to be coached, but they didn't have resources themselves. So I hope that answers your question. It's not linear at all. There's a lot of curvy paths.
Thanks, Yuxi. Okay, so we'll take one more question for Yuxi, and we'll come back to some more later on. So the next one here is from Julia, who's quite interested in UX research. However, their background so far has been in account management for a SaaS company. Do you think it's realistic to start in UX research?
I think absolutely. I have not met like two UX researchers with the same background. Like on my team currently, we have people who come from like chemical engineering background. Can you believe it? You can start out as a chemical engineer and pivot into a UX researcher. I think absolutely. I think the first step is thinking about what are your transferable skills and starting to think about building that portfolio of projects, especially thinking sometimes. So I guess like related to the first question, if you don't have clients, you've never worked with an external partner on any projects, come up with your own project. That's what I did. For my master's project, it was my own project to study evening routines with parents and 3 to 5 year olds, and designing a prototype to support them in that experience. So I think maybe that's actually square number one, is think about what you might create for your own project and then leverage that as a way to get the first external client. Awesome. Thanks for the question.
Great, thanks, Yuxi. Okay, we're going to continue to the next presentation. I am conscious of time, but we will definitely try and get to as many of your questions at the end as possible, so please hang around. So the next presenter is Nuck Busman, who's a senior UX designer at the Home Depot. Nick is going to be sharing insights into a topic that is really critically important to be aware of when forming your early stage UX career. So the topic he's covering is becoming the UX designer your cross-functional partners want. So I'm really curious to hear where you take this, Nick. Over to you.
Awesome. Okay, I'm unmuted. Perfect. So a lot of this, obviously, hi, I'm Nick. As Chris just mentioned, I'm a senior UX designer at Home Depot, and I work on customer communications there. This presentation comes from working at a couple different places and kind of the cumulative experience of working with different cross functions. And it's like, well, what does that mean? First of all, talking about what cross-functional means within enterprises generally, like larger organizations and even mid-level, sometimes smaller organizations, you have this kind of diamond or sometimes a triangle where you have these different people of different disciplines. You have obviously all of us in UX. You have developers who are building things, coders, engineers, software developers. There's many different synonyms, but people who are coding, they will be generally integrated into your team. You'll have PMs, which are referred to as project managers or product managers. They're the kind of scheduling folks who help keep things moving through the project. And then sometimes you'll see QA, sometimes you won't, depends on where you're at and the scale of the company. QA is quality assurance, and they're the folks who are making sure that stuff isn't getting broken before it's released. So Hugh, with his kind of talking about like, well, when you release software to millions of people, you want to make sure that it actually functions the right way before you make millions of people mad at using your stuff. So that's what we talk about when we say cross-functional, right? Is you're collaborating each ways across this diamond, or sometimes again the triangle, to continue to work on projects and products within your organization. And why am I giving this presentation? Is because I hear and I see a lot of different expectations from people coming into the industry, and even people who are fresh into the industry and they're starting out in their career. They're wondering how exactly the UX designer role fits within the cross-functional team. And a lot of misconceptions that I see within this role and people starting out is it's like you're kind of a rock star, right? Is you're coming in and you're doing like flashy UI. I know the better way to become a greater designer is to just get better and better at visuals and to do it faster and faster, and to just kind of like hop from project to project and come in and be a rock star, do your gig, and move on. And I would say, based even on the conversations that we've already had from the previous presentations, is it's kind of the opposite. Is sometimes it's a lot about being slower and being more meticulous. It's about supporting your team, and it's about taking time to improve on the process that you're engaging across that diamond with your cross-functional partners, and building really strong relationships, personal and professional relationships with the people across the different spectrums of working within product, within development, and within QA. Is they have a lot of needs, and there are ways for you as a UX designer to contribute to that and to help build rapport. And all of this is going to pay dividends for you, because the positive feedback that you're going to get goes around to the rest of the organization. It goes to your managers, it goes to their managers, right? Like, doing good work reflects positively on you. It's not just like, oh yeah, it was so cool how Nick came in and he designed it in 5 minutes and then he left me to my own devices to try to figure out everything else on my own. No, Nick took the time to spend time with me so that I understood the design, so that I was able to fulfill my task and my function as part of the team. So I wanted to break down each of the three corresponding sections, and I'm going to start out with development. So developers are obviously the people who write the code. They're the people who help bring the thing to life, right? They take your designs, you collaborate with them, and you help bring apps to life, certain processes. And so talking briefly about their core responsibilities, they need to understand how to build a product. They're not just, monkeys on typewriters. These are functional human beings who are working alongside you to understand difficult and then how to build it through their experience. So that involves collaboration, where you're working with them alongside to. I'm being unstable. Am I okay still?
Yeah, we lost you for a few seconds, but you're back, Nick.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Did I get left off on this slide?
Yeah, we just started the following slide.
Okay. Sorry. I'll recap. Starting with developers, these are the folks who are going to be writing code, and they're going to be helping bring things to life, like applications, websites, processes. And sorry, fireworks, American time. 4th of July is not quite here. Spooked me. Understanding how to build the product, right? You're going to be working with your developers in order for them to understand how exactly they should be structuring their code, and understanding how they're going to be implementing all the stuff that you're putting in front of them. So that's going to involve direct collaboration, and it's also going to be responsible for fixing things and understanding how they should be fixed so they should function the right way. And things that they love, right, is when you're giving insight into what you're trying to accomplish and why. Normally, a lot of traditional processes might just kind of keep you siloed and you kind of throw things over the fence. But what actually they really love is when you make time to introduce a project and what you're trying to work on and what your efforts are actually going to yield. Because you'll actually find that developers are generally pretty interested in learning how they can contribute more directly to a project, and because it pays off for them to help you understand what they need to do in order to accomplish the project and in order to meet the requirements of the project. So helping them understand, hey, what are the user's needs? This is why the user needs this. This is how this is a big pain point for the customer. That helps them understand how they can directly contribute to that. Also, reaching out to them for feedback. They absolutely love when you can get in front of them and say, hey, rather than you spending several hours working on a design and then putting it in front of a developer, making time to talk with them and sending them messages and saying like, hey, this is what I'm thinking about. Do you think this is feasible? Do you think there are any challenges with this? This gets their early buy-in on the design and makes sure that they're not having to put up their guard and put up their defenses and say like, oh, this is too much work, or this is going to be too hard. Like getting them involved earlier and earlier in that process helps put their input into your work and helps you do your job better, and then will also help make their job easier. And ultimately, developers love when people are flexible. Sometimes developers are working against older code or older code bases, a lot of old technology, and sometimes what we call technical debt. And not everything is achievable all at once. Sometimes it can be instanced out into progression over time, and we can say, okay, we can change A, B, then C over time, but we can't, it's unlikely that we should do it all at once. And so being flexible and understanding that you are, yes, a user experience designer, but you're also working directly with these people that you need to practice empathy with, just as you practice empathy with the user. That doesn't mean, fold over and, don't let them get what they want, but it means collaborating with them together to find something that meets both of your needs. And then also as the representative for the customer or the user. Moving on to the quality assurance folks. These are the people who are towards the last end of the process in regards to releasing software, releasing websites, applications, so on and so forth. They're the ones who are testing what is being built. And their core responsibilities are obviously making sure that things are functional. They are looking at, they're cross-referencing your designs, and they're cross-referencing what's actually existing and testing it out to make sure that everything's okay. They report out any bugs that they find, or there any errors. They try to break things. They say, hey, if the user does this, this problem happens. And so their role is largely based on documentation, right? And they love to get that feedback opportunity for you to say like, hey, how could I improve the documentation for the next project? Is how can I improve my processes in order to help support you as we go forward into the next projects? Because as they're being introduced to your work, it's towards the end of the project. And so the best thing to do is to do a retro and say like, hey, let's talk about how we could do this better next time. Even putting things in front of QA before even devs see it, because that way it's not already created, right? QA is working pretty regularly through these interfaces and has pretty good exposure to something that already exists, generally speaking. So they're going to have some insights about testing and even questions about the interface before anything could even be put in front of developers. So sometimes it's nice to walk through your designs, to schedule time and walk through them at regular intervals. That way, not only QA, but other functions as well are able to see your designs and go, hey, I have questions about that. What if the user does this? What if the user does that? That way, you can reduce the amount of rework that you're going to have to do as a designer, but also you're preventing that from even getting into the developer's hands and finding out big problems that happen, or finding out that there are big problems before anyone even starts working on it besides just you. And finally, providing additional context to your designs is so when they have something like Figma open or Sketch open and they're seeing the designs, sometimes it helps to say, hey, what would you like to see alongside this? Does it help to see the mobile and the desktop version right next to each other? Do you want to see notes for the different states about what happens when the user clicks here or hovers here or takes this action? How can I help you, not just with documentation, but looking at the designs themselves to help them understand and process the information that they're seeing within your designs? Moving on to the final part of product managers, project managers. I'm just going to call them product for this particular example, but they're the people who kind of keep things moving, right? It's hard a little bit to explain what exactly a project manager does. Sometimes it overlaps closely with what UX is, but I like to think of it as the kind of glue that keeps QA and dev and UX together, right? In terms of scheduling meetings, the responsibility for communicating outwards to their managers, other stakeholders in the business operations, anyone under the sun, right? your project manager, product manager is going to be there to be responsible for those things, while the other functions such as UX, Dev, QA are able to focus primarily on their work rather than communicating as much outward. So, and they're also responsible for communicating that success of like, hey, what did you guys do well? Why are you doing the work? What did it result in? There are opportunities for you to chip in there. So one thing that product people love is when they have a shared understanding of the work that you're doing, right? Is you as a UX designer are going to go through a lot of different methodologies, interviews, testing, research, and having the shared understanding of why exactly you're doing the things that you're doing and giving them particularly opportunities to participate is going to be influential and instrumental in their perception of you and as well as the success that you have together, right? Offer for them to sit in on interviews and take notes. Have them just simply observe. They don't need to do anything, or otherwise participate in any sort of exercises that you're conducting as a UX designer, and they're going to see the user's responses, for example, in first person, and they're going to go, wow, now I totally understand why we're all doing this, and now I can better communicate that outwards to other people, and I understand the problem better of what we're trying to solve for. Other things like the highlights of what you're doing, right? I've seen a lot of reports from starting UX designers where it is just a huge paper, and that's great to have all the details written down, but people are very limited on time and presentation deadlines come up very quickly. So always having your documenting your objectives, your goals, and summarizing your learnings and insights. Having the cliff notes of everything you've done is really, really effective to having your PM love everything that you do, because they're short on time. They might be working across multiple different teams, and they can't communicate everything about what they're doing. They have to show the highlights to their stakeholders and really cut to the chase about what it is that you're accomplishing within your role. And finally, the final keynote of that would be, hey, when you're doing designs, make sure you have some stuff that's presentation ready. Once you reach a stopping point with the work that you're working on, stop and clean up and make sure that they're having something that they can put into their slideshows and say, okay, this is what we're going to communicate outwards. This is a reflection of the work that we've done. I know in my space, moving fast and my Figma files can get pretty messy, and I always have to take the time and say, hey, don't show this picture. This is embarrassing. Please show the right version. Please show the presentation version that has real data, looks accurate, and is an accurate reflection of what developers are going to build. And that way it also demonstrates what our stakeholders need to understand. So that's a lot, but to recap all that is really to take the time to support your team and talk to your coworkers. A lot of what you're doing here is building relationships, building that rapport, and that's how you stand out as a rock star designer, is by taking that time and not just leaving your team in the dust and saying like, I have Figma designs to do. I don't need to deal with you guys. It's really investing in your team, investing that time, and making sure that everyone is you're making their job easier. So thank you for that. And I will kick it back to Chris for questions.
Thank you, Nick. That was great. We can't emphasize enough the importance of how you relate with other people in the organization, in the teams that you work with, to be effective at UX design. This is a communication role in many sets. It's about getting people on board with what you've spent time learning about through your UX research, what your recommendations are. And you're just going to have a lot more success if people find you good to work with and understand what you do. And I just think you've really nailed that important aspect, Nick. And we speak to a lot of early stage designers who are just starting their career out there, so they're very focused on their technical skills, and validly they need to learn those skills to be able to do the job. But at Harness Projects, we put about a 60% emphasis on those attitudinal strengths. How do you communicate with others? How do you present your design? How do you collaborate? Are you self-aware? Are you able to take feedback and be resilient in that feedback? A lot of these aspects will make you an incredible UX designer, or someone that might be difficult to work with. So really, as you're starting a career, put a lot of thought into how you're coming across and how you're approaching the job. So we've got a whole bunch of questions for everyone, including yourself, Nick. What I'm going to do, Nick has just a few minutes until he has to run, but Hieu and Yuxi will stay for about another extra 10 to 15 minutes. We're going to do a rapid fire Q&A process to get through as many questions as possible. But we'll start with any questions that you have for Nick. Please send them through, but we're going to just go through from the top of the list down, and I'll just sort of nominate different panelists to take these questions. All right, so starting from the top, we had an earlier question from Yubin Chang, who asks, hello, my name is Yubin. I'm currently a third-year undergrad studying film and television with a minor in psychology. However, have become interested in possibly pursuing a UX design career path. Do you think my undergrad studies are applicable in the UX design world, or should I start thinking about a degree switch? Interesting question. Does anyone want to tackle that question that feels strongly about it?
I would say mine's going to be brief, which is any prior experience in regards to if you're writing papers, for example, like as long as your role or education has something about distilling down information and communicating it to another person, like that is absolutely going to be relevant. Any sort of social or soft skills, like that's going to be relevant, presentational skills, because at the end of the day, we are people who go into a project, understand the space, and then try to communicate the needs of the user and the needs of the project to someone else. So wherever that makes sense from your education or your prior experience, I'd say that's applicable and something you should definitely speak to in interviews.
Yuxi, did you want to add?
I want to add to what Nick said. My eyes lit up when you said TV, film, because that's actually literally one of the greatest inspirations for storytelling. For me as a researcher, and also some of the best designers I've seen, they're just so great at telling the story behind what they designed. So I think it's super relevant. Storytelling is a key skill.
Awesome.
On top of psychology, which is also just the basis, the foundation of human-centered design. So yes.
Absolutely, that's a really good point. A lot of people with a psychology background tend to do really well in the behavioral sides of UX. Next question is from Alison, who's a web developer looking to transition into UX design. So similar theme here. I was wondering, how often is graphic design used in UX? For example, Alison was looking at job descriptions, and many seem to require people knowing Photoshop, Illustrator, etc. Hieu, that might be a question for you, and perhaps Nick on the design front.
Yeah, so I'll take a stab at this. So I think that having the basic understanding of graphic design is important. In most organizations, they expect a UX or product designer to basically work on a project end-to-end, meaning that you do some research, partner with researchers, coming up solution, and also actually produce the final design. Some companies, maybe bigger companies, they have like a dedicated UI designer, but I've seen less of those nowadays. So yeah, so without the proper understanding of graphic design, you have a tough time with visual design, meaning that typography, colors, all of these things, right? So basically, you don't need to get the whole degree in graphic design, but there's a lot of online resources, to train you. And I think another tip is that one way to get better at graphic design is, observe. Graphic design is also all around us. Good design, bad design, right? So pay attention to what are some of the product and services, or even marketing design that you really resonate with you, and trying to analyze why, right? So I think over time you get better as a visual designer. So hope that helps.
Great. Nick, any other points there?
Sorry, I was reading through the chat to see if there was any answers that I could answer directly. Real quick recap, what was the question again?
Just in terms of job descriptions that might require people to know Photoshop, Illustrator, how important is the graphic design side of things for UX?
Yeah. I actually graduated with a Bachelor of Fine Arts with a focus in graphic design. And I would say a lot of those job requirements that I've seen applied to myself, like that say Photoshop, Illustrator, and all sorts of stuff. I would say that those are based on a historic evolution of web designing. Like web design and app design kind of came into now that we actually understand this role, we actually understand it best as UX design instead. Web designers were kind of like a grab bag. App designers were a grab bag. I remember designing an app in Illustrator. I don't recommend it. I think those are just like a historic artifact of people who are posting the job descriptions are maybe not the same people who actually understand like what the job position is and who's truly hiring for that. So a recruiter or an HR person is maybe not going to know everything about UX, and they might just have some stuff in there that isn't truly applicable. I would say I've in the past several years of working in UX, I have never had to crack open Photoshop or Illustrator at all for my responsibilities. For graphic design, though, I use those skills. Just you use that for visual communication. That's what graphic designers do. Going back to my point about communication is you're going to want to make sure that, hey, if you got some visual talent, feel free to employ that to help other people understand the concepts that you're trying to communicate and do it in a nice fancy way instead of maybe some of the more visually less impressive things like Photoshop or not Photoshop, like MS Paint or some older Microsoft products that our PMs love to use.
Thanks, Nick. If you need to run, Nick, totally fine. We appreciate your time tonight. Thank you for your great presentation. We'll continue with Yuxi and Hieu for the next 15 minutes.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody, and take care.
Thanks. So the next question is from Kyle Johnson, and this is a really simple question for you, Hieu. What was the typeface that you used in your slides? It looks fun and accessible.
I saw that question too. So actually, Atlassian, a few years ago, we rebranded the overall brand for the company. And as part of the process, we actually built our own typeface. So we call it Charlie Sands. So it's an internal, it's not a publicly available font. So sorry. But it's really, we use it a lot. Well, there's two main typefaces within Atlassian. One is for products, and then the other is more for like website and public marketing material. So that's the one that I use, the Charlie Sands. So yeah, that's the short answer.
Great, thank you, Hieu. Next question is from Tris Yap. Did any of you find yourself in a position where you were the only member in a team with a design background? And if so, how did you navigate through advocating your design decisions and expertise when working on a project? So that might be more related to you, Hieu, given your design background. Were you ever in that situation?
So can you quickly recap the question?
Yeah, sure. Just were you in a position where you were the only member in a team with the design background, and how did you advocate about your design decisions with other people? Okay, got it. I would say both agencies and startup, I was lucky enough that I have, my design managers. So I was never the only one. But when I remember there was a project when I started out with Atlassian, and I was working on this building, like commerce experience. And for a long time, all of the building is like the afterthought when it comes to experience, right? Like, just paying, right? Using credit card to pay, right? So there was not a lot of understanding of UX. So I remember even in my early day at Atlassian, I need to using some of the tips that Nick actually pointed out earlier, right? Like really gain the empathy and understanding from the developers. It's a very heavy engineering team. And so oftentimes design is often like overlooked. So I need to set up some one-on-ones or even in some of the team presentation, walking them through why this like certain design decision is important and show them some of the customers' insights, especially videos, helps a lot. Like when they see like a building admin struggle to use a credit card from Germany, for instance, they say, wow, okay, that's huge. Now we need to solve it. So kind of bring in more research inside, I think oftentimes helps, folks understanding the value of design. Thanks, Hieu. Yuxi, I want to send you a question from Thena. She asks, what are the personality traits that you think would thrive in a UX research role?
Oh, wow, such a wonderful question. I think first, a really good listener. And then we talk a lot about empathy. I think of it as like being a very open mind, being genuinely curious about people. Just no matter who you're talking to, you find yourself just wanting to ask more questions, like genuinely really curious about this person's life. And then I think another personality trait, so curiosity, great listening skills, and personality. I don't know. I feel like being fun, playful is a very important personality, because research, one of the most important ways for research to make impact is to influence people, and research can, sometimes people, when they hear the word research, they think it's dry. So like nobody wants to listen to a really dry research presentation. So finding ways to be creative and to tell a good story, and I think this is something that Hieu and Nick both touched on. Like if you're fun and playful, other people want to work with you. So I think the last one, I think, is more of a given. It's just being very dependable. I think that's a really important trait, because to really run a research study from beginning to end, there's a lot of moving pieces. You're working with a lot of stakeholders, and you need to deliver by the time that when you said you would do certain things, and that helps to build trust as the foundation. And then they know, your stakeholders who you rely on for recruitment, for example, know that, oh, like, to work with the research, like we need to also hold up our side of the bargain. So yeah.
Great, thanks, Yuxi. Next questions to you as well, Yuxi. Did you have any, or do you need any design experience to work in the UX research field? Perhaps the most unique part of this question is, are UX research and UX design intertwined, where one can't work without the other?
Oh, I think great design has to be grounded in user needs. So they're intertwined in that sense. Like there's always research as part of the design process, regardless if a team actually has a specialized role called a UX researcher. Like Hieu mentioned earlier, as very small startups, most startups I've seen, they only have the capacity to hire their first UX designer, and that designer is probably also doing research. So researcher, you're probably joining a mature organization that has the specialized role. You don't have to come in with being a designer already. I think you can pick up a lot of those design skills or design acumen, like an eye for design, through working.
Great, thanks, Yuxi. So Eva is asking a question. Hello, Yuxi. I'm passionate about UX. I have valuable transferable skills. I, however, do not have any relevant technical experience. Eva may not be able to afford harness projects training. Am I better off learning about UX technical tools on YouTube, for instance, before looking for gigs jobs, or head straight into looking for gigs jobs that will let a beginner learn on the job? And I guess one comment just before we pass on to Yuxi, Eva, just in case you're not aware of it, we do have scholarship options available for some students. So we can subsidize up to 50% off the course fee. There is an application process that you do online. I'll put it in the chat, have a look at it, but totally valid question, and I'll pass over to Yuxi to give her thoughts.
I love this question. I think this is not, I hope this doesn't sound too much, because at Coursera, one of our mission is to make education accessible for all. There's one particular certificate right now on Coursera that's called the Google certificate for UX design. It has a series of 5 courses, and one of them specifically focused on UX research, and it leads you to conduct a research project. There's another one that's from University of Michigan, and I think there's another one from University of San Diego that also takes you through the entire process from beginning to end of doing a research project. The reason why I mentioned them is actually one of my teammates today on my team was able to pivot through working on one of those projects. Obviously, she also had like her own unique story, her own unique combination of skills that's come before doing this project. But I think, looking at all the resources available around you, I think that the key is, where can you find opportunity to do a tangible project with an external client that you can use to build up your portfolio.
Awesome. Thank you, Yuxi. And yeah, we have seen a lot of students that have come into our program from the Google course. So it is a really great place to start. You know, we don't have any biases around that. We feel like any UX design training that you can get from other sort of more affordable options is worthwhile. Our focus is on that project experience. So when you're ready to build out that portfolio with some real clients and have mentorship from people like Yuxi and Hieu and Nick, that's what we specialize in. So yeah, good luck with that search. I hope it really works out for you. Next question, we will go down the list. This was, I guess, also related to your presentation, Yuxi, so these are from a little bit earlier in the night. In terms of compensation, what exactly is a nominal fee? I guess this relates to the gig question. Is it direct compensation to you, or does it include funding for user testing? They also had a follow-up question of how do you go about recruiting participants for user testing?
Yeah, thanks for asking that question. From my experience, I've had experience working with nonprofits where the nominal fee is literally $200 for a project. So it's not a lot. The reason why there's a need for nominal fee is then they are actually incentivized in some ways. So I'm not saying $200 is the right amount, but that is my experience. You can, for recruitment, one of the most important things is trust. So for example, if I'm working with a organization, I'm reaching out to parents of a certain race to really understand their experiences with children's books. I really need help from this organization to reach their users who would be willing to open up to me and talk about sometimes hard topics, for example, like racial equity being represented in children's literature. So having that nominal fee, if that this is already I guess like the assumption here is they cannot pay for the project by project or hourly fee. I think we should definitely try to aim for that first. In that case, with a nominal fee is we have a relationship, we sign a contract, and here are my expectations as the consultant to you, that you will help me identify these certain number, like let's say 5 users who fit these criteria within this time period. I think the biggest pain point for me as like a independent consultant is when the recruitment falls through, then or it takes a really, really long time and it just drags out the project or starts bleeding into the next project. So laying down some guardrails in the beginning, it would be really helpful. Actually, that's a process that I still need to iterate on.
Thanks, Yuxi. Hieu, I've got a question for you. For an entry-level UX designer, this is from Allison, what is the typical day-to-day responsibilities, say, in a corporate versus a startup? Well, how would you define what you would do on a day-to-day basis?
Sure, yeah. So in my experience, when I started out as graphic designers, like I mentioned earlier, I didn't start out working on tackling a project right away, but I was helping out, the lead designers on documentations and, preparing the assets and really like visual QAing to see if there's any gaps, right? And ask you questions, because sometimes, those little things got slipped out. So I want to make sure that, that there's no gaps in there. At Atlassian, at a bigger company, I had the opportunity to mentor some of the incoming graphic designers. So their day-to-day would be, they are given, an opportunity to actually work on a project right away, but with some guidance from others, senior designers. So whether, more like in every week we do like design crit. And also we have, they get paired with another mentors. So they meet every few weeks. So that really helped, the young designers to start doing right away, right? That's the best way to learn, but also having the resource to ask questions and reach out if they feel stuck or they feel like, okay, I have some questions.
Thanks, Hieu. That's great. Next question, and this question is actually for me, so I'm conscious of time. Yuxi and Hieu, I know you had an extra 15 minutes. If you need to roll, that's okay. We thank you for your time. but I'll just fill this question in the meantime. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Yuxi. So this question is from Natasha. We also have a similar question from Anonymous. And Natasha is interested in becoming a UX researcher. Are Harness Projects courses more geared towards design, or would I be able to learn more about UX research by learning via Harness Projects? Similarly, Anonymous asks, a lot of courses and boot camps offered are focused on UX design rather than UX research. So what is the best path for someone who is interested in becoming a UX researcher? So I guess just to give some information about our program in this context, a lot of what we do is grounded in UX research. So our program is very different to, I guess, your typical bootcamp training provider. We actually curate 3 real-world projects over a 6-month period for our students. So these projects run from anywhere from 7 to 9 weeks. They're really in-depth. They're with real clients. They're real business challenges. And it gives our students an opportunity to go through the full end-to-end UX process. And that includes research. So in the first project, we actually take you through a 9-week end-to-end UX design process. 5 weeks is on research. And then the last 4 weeks, we're going to go into the fundamentals of the design part with Figma. The second project is then an advanced research project, just specifically focusing on research. The reason we do this is we know that hiring managers want to see that you have the capacity and capability to show how research informs your design, that you're not just sort of shooting from the hip with your design approach, and that you have a rigorous approach to the way that you come up with your recommendations. So that second project is really an in-depth look at UX research. Students put together a formal research report and they really learn a lot about that space. In the final project, we then dive again deeper into UI design. So we look at high fidelity prototyping with Figma, design systems, even documenting your design for your developers. So this is related to Nick's point earlier around how do you work with cross-functional teams? That's a really important part of our program as well. So with this course, the idea is that students are able to build a full portfolio of projects, have confidence in their research, their UI design skills, and be able to start applying for jobs from the very first day of graduation. So hopefully that answers your question, Natasha. I'll put a link in the chat so you can check that out, along with the anonymous person who also asked a similar question. And yeah, we'll move on. Hugh, do you have a few minutes or do you need to run?
Yeah, I can take one more question.
All right. Do you have a preference? There's a lot there. Otherwise, I'll just pick one.
Yeah, you can just pick one.
Okay, no worries. Let me have a look here. So Lucky Dip. So that one we've answered. Okay, this is an interesting question. This is from Dean, who asks, what are some red flags that might indicate that someone's not a good fit for a UX role?
Interesting. So putting into the interviewer seat.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for the past year, I've been interviewing designers for Atlassian too, and you know, usually when all of the interviews come together after all of the interview sessions, you know, we would want to hear, is there any red flag? So I think that's a very valid question. I mean, depending on the role, depending on the seniority of the role, right? A more junior role can be, I would say, it's more flexibility. So, okay, I'm just going to speak from a general design role in general, right? Like regardless of seniority, I would say that a red flag would be a lack of process. So when you interview for a job and you walk into your portfolio, if you jump in straight either to the final design without proper process, that's one red flag. Like, do you really understand the UX process, or you just, you know, like provide a final visual design? Another, I would say, red flag is, you know, no research involved. Back to my presentation, not all companies and not all, you know, organizations have the resource to do research, but you need to have some research, right, in place. Whether you work on the side gigs, research needs to be a part of the design thinking process. So if interviewees show no research, then yeah, that's another red flag. I would say the last one, you know, when it comes to red flag in general, is like there's like communication, like soft skill communication skill. So, but, you see, give a good example of like, if you tell a good story of how you collaborate with your PM or other stakeholders, that's a good sign. If you don't have a good story, then sometimes it for a bigger company, usually, that's not a really good sign. If you're coming straight out of school, then use your example working with other classmates. Let's just say if you work with someone from, engineering or maybe business, what was the collaboration? At some point, you might have some disagreement. How do you solve it, right? As long as you can use real examples to demonstrate a skill, I think that's good. So I would say those are the top reflex that I would think of.
Great. Thank you, Hieu. I really appreciate your time and staying back for extra. So have a great evening. We'll see you soon on the next course, as you'll be mentioning.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Bye.
So everyone, thank you so much for your incredible questions. Look, we got through almost 26 of those. There are a bunch more. I'm going to try and answer some here just via text to the student, for the ones that I can field. So feel free to hang around for that. Otherwise, we really appreciate your time tonight. We hope you got a lot out of it. There will be a recording that will be sent out in the next few days via email. We have all your email addresses, so please keep an eye out for that. We have done a number of these webinars on all different topics, so check out our YouTube channel if you want to see some others, and we will generally take advice on what topics you'd like to hear from next time. We always bring in mentors from industry, so you'll see 3 great mentors were on the panel tonight. We'll have some different ones next time. So thank you for your time and have a lovely evening.